The chamber was silent, but for the hum of the energy field surrounding the accused. A boy, small, frail, and barely old enough to understand the gravity of his situation, stood alone at the center of the Imperial Tribunal. Shackles, far too large for his thin wrists, clanked together when he moved, their polished metal reflecting the cold, sterile light of the courtroom. At the far end of the room, seated on a throne-like chair, the magistrate of the Galactic Empire observed the child with an expression of profound disinterest. His crimson robes, embroidered with gold threads woven from the silk of 1,000 conquered worlds, barely shifted as he raised a single, clawed hand. The murmurs of the gathered aristocracy faded instantly. "This human," the magistrate said, his voice a mechanical hiss through his breathing apparatus, "has been found guilty of trespassing, espionage, and defying imperial law. The punishment is death." The boy flinched. His breath hitched in his throat, but he refused to cry. He had seen his father negotiate peace treaties with alien dignitaries, always with a composed expression, always with dignity. He tried to mimic that now, standing straight despite the weight of his chains. "I didn't do anything," he whispered. His voice was lost in the vast hall. A ripple of laughter spread through the assembled nobles, their voices a mix of rasping insectoid clicks, guttural snarls, and synthesized hums. To them, he was a curiosity, a primitive from a world of barely spacefaring creatures. His words held no weight here. The magistrate gestured to his left, where a tall, sinewy alien with deep violet skin and pupil-less eyes stepped forward. The executor. He carried no weapons, needed none. A simple touch from his kind could unravel flesh at the molecular level. The boy did not understand the science, but he had heard the whispers of the guards. There would be nothing left of him but dust. Terror clawed up his throat, but he forced it down. "Please," he said louder now. "I just want to go home." The executor said nothing. He reached out a three-fingered hand, and the boy braced himself. The pain never came. A deep, guttural voice rumbled through the chamber, stopping the executor in his tracks. "This is a mistake." A figure stood near the tribunal's entrance, armored in imperial military regalia, though he bore no insignia of rank. He was older than most of the assembled officers, his features hardened by countless campaigns. General Varric, a decorated war hero, his words carried weight. Even the magistrate straightened slightly in his chair. Varric's black eyes studied the child for a long moment before turning to the tribunal. "This is not justice. The humans have been tolerant, but this, you would execute a child." The magistrate's expression barely shifted. "Tolerant," he echoed, as though the word itself was an insult. "No, General, they have been weak." Varric's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He had fought humans before. He had seen what they were capable of. It had taken an entire fleet to subjugate one of their outer colonies, an insignificant rock with no strategic value, because they had refused to surrender. They did not break under orbital bombardment. They did not yield when outnumbered. They did not know fear the way the Empire expected them to. And now the tribunal would take their child. The magistrate tilted his head, eyes glinting with something almost amused. "Do you fear them, General?" Varric hesitated a fraction too long. The magistrate turned back to the boy, waving a dismissive hand. "It is decided." The executor moved swiftly. For a single, stretched moment, there was silence. Then, a sickening crack as the boy's body twisted unnaturally, his atoms unraveling in an instant. A rush of air filled the void where he had stood, scattering ashes across the polished obsidian floor. The chamber erupted in applause. The magistrate stood, raising his arms to address the gathered nobles. "Let this be a lesson to the humans. They are not above our law. They are not beyond our reach." From the upper galleries, a dozen drones hovered, their lenses capturing the moment from every angle. Within hours, the execution would be broadcast across the Empire. A warning, a declaration of dominion. It would also be the Empire's gravest mistake. A screen flickered to life in the heart of the United Terran Federation's war room. The air was heavy with silence. Dozens of high-ranking officials, admirals, and intelligence officers stood in perfect stillness, their eyes locked on the grainy transmission. The image of a boy, terrified but resolute. The proclamation of guilt. The twisted smile of the magistrate. Then the execution. The recording ended, leaving only the quiet hum of the projector. No one spoke. Not at first. Then, a hand curled into a fist against the polished surface of the war table. The President of Earth, Commander-in-Chief of the UTF, slowly rose to her feet. Her face was expressionless, but the sharpness of her gaze could have cut steel. How long until this transmission reaches the public? A nearby officer, pale and visibly shaken, swallowed hard. It already has, ma'am. It's spreading across the entire Sol network. The colonies, he stopped, hesitant. They're calling for war. War. The word hung in the air like a live weapon. An admiral, his uniform adorned with medals from conflicts fought decades ago, exhaled sharply. Madam President, if we do this, there's no turning back. The president's gaze remained fixed on the darkened screen. When she spoke, her voice was cold, unyielding. There was never any turning back. The silence in the room deepened. Officers exchanged glances, knowing what was about to happen, knowing there was only one course left. The president placed both hands on the table, leaning forward as she gave the order that would change the course of galactic history. Mobilize the fleet. A beat of silence. Then, a single word, spoken with all the finality of a death sentence. Annihilation. The first sign of Earth's wrath came in the form of silence. A vast, unnatural quiet settled over the outer colonies of the Galactic Empire. Communications disrupted, trade routes severed, border patrols lost without a trace. The Empire, so accustomed to being the hunter, suddenly felt the presence of something far greater lurking beyond the void. Then the silence ended. The first assault came without warning. A fleet of Terran warships emerged from subspace just beyond the gas giant Kaler 7, where an Imperial battle station monitored traffic across 3 sectors. The station had existed for over 2 centuries, its defenses capable of repelling full-scale sieges. It lasted precisely 4 minutes. Orbital bombardments tore through its hull before the garrison could even raise shields. Terran railgun slugs, each traveling at near relativistic speeds, punched through layers of reinforced plating like paper, detonating within the station's core. Survivors barely had time to scream before the reactor imploded, reducing the once mighty fortress to drifting debris. Across the Empire, similar reports flooded in. Entire fleets vanishing, planetary defenses overwhelmed, communication relays blacked out. The Terrans had not declared war. They had simply arrived, methodical and merciless. On the bridge of the U.T.F. Retribution, Admiral Elias Carter watched as the holographic projections updated in real time. Enemy forces scrambled to respond. Entire legions mobilized in desperation. But it was too late. The Empire had spent centuries believing humanity was weak, insignificant. Now, the truth unfolded across their dying worlds. "Sir," a lieutenant reported, his voice steady despite the chaos unraveling across the galaxy. "The capital system's outer defenses have fallen. The path to Eshran Prime is open." Eshran Prime, the heart of the Empire. Admiral Carter nodded, his expression unreadable. "Begin the final assault." The fleet surged forward. The Imperial homeworld had never known invasion. Its fleets, the most powerful in the galaxy, had always ensured that war remained something distant, something suffered by lesser species. Now those same fleets burned in the void. The first wave of Terran dreadnoughts shattered the orbital defenses within moments of arrival. Advanced kinetic weaponry, fusion-lanced artillery, and AI-piloted strike craft tore through the Imperial Navy with clinical precision. No wasted movement, no hesitation. The Empire fought with fury, but it was the fury of a wounded animal, desperate, disorganized, doomed. From the surface, the skies became a nightmare of fire and falling wreckage. Once proud Imperial warships, now broken and burning, crashed into the oceans, the mountains, the very cities that had ruled the galaxy for generations. The illusion of invincibility shattered in the span of hours. In the Imperial Palace, the magistrate stood at the center of the War Council, his regal composure finally cracking. Advisors screamed over one another, contradicting reports spilling across the holographic displays. They needed reinforcements. There were none left. They needed time. Time had run out. Their fleet is unmatched, General Varric admitted, his voice devoid of its usual arrogance. We underestimated them. The magistrate turned to him sharply, desperation flickering in his reptilian eyes. Then negotiate. Varric hesitated. It's too late for that. A tremor ran through the palace as distant explosions rattled the foundations. The war had already reached the streets. Terran drop pods fell from the sky like meteors, landing in the heart of the capital. From within emerged humanity's finest, shock troopers clad in mechanized exo-armor, their weaponry years ahead of anything the Empire had ever encountered. They moved through the city with terrifying efficiency, cutting through Imperial soldiers as if they were little more than a minor obstacle. For the child, a Terran soldier roared, leading his squad through a barricade of alien infantry. The phrase echoed across the battlefield, a battle cry that chilled even the most hardened Imperial warriors. Within hours, resistance collapsed. The once great city of Eshran burned, its towering spires reduced to rubble. In the palace, the magistrate stared at the grand doors, now shaking under the relentless impact of Terran siege units. His mind raced for options for some last trick, some last gamble. None came. With a deafening crack, the doors burst inward. A team of Terran soldiers stormed the chamber, their weapons raised. And at the center of them, stepping forward with the measured precision of a man who knew exactly how this would end, was Admiral Elias Carter. The magistrate straightened, forcing his expression into one of cold defiance. "You will never rule us." Carter regarded him with something almost akin to pity. "We don't want to rule you." A moment of silence. Then a single gunshot. The magistrate crumpled to the floor, his blood pooling beneath the golden embroidery of his robes. The war was over. The Empire was no more. And humanity stood alone among the ashes. The galaxy stood in the shadow of its own ruin. Where once the Empire's banners hung across 1,000 worlds, there was now only silence, the lingering echoes of war. The Terran fleet remained in high orbit, an unspoken warning to any who dared to resist the inevitable. The war had ended, but its consequences had only begun to unfold. Admiral Elias Carter walked the length of the shattered Imperial Palace, his boots crunching over broken marble and scorched metal. The grand corridors, once filled with the Empire's ruling elite, lay abandoned, save for the Terran forces securing the last vestiges of power. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid scent of plasma burns. At the far end of the throne room, the last surviving members of the Empire's High Council knelt, bound and bloodied, their elaborate garments torn, their expressions a mix of defiance and despair. Carter regarded them for a long moment. He had fought many wars, but never had victory felt so absolute. "You should have surrendered," he said finally. One of them, an older noble with a crest of dark blue scales, sneered despite his injuries. "And what would that have changed? You were always going to do this." Carter studied him, then crouched so they were at eye level. "No, we weren't." The noble's sneer faltered. Carter's voice remained calm, but beneath it was something sharp, something edged with finality. "We asked for justice. You answered with mockery and cruelty. We asked for reason. You responded with the murder of child." He exhaled, shaking his head. "You made this choice long before we ever set foot in your halls." Another counselor, younger, trembling, spoke with a hoarse whisper. "What happens now?" Carter stood. "The Empire is finished. Your rule is over. What happens next depends on how the rest of the galaxy chooses to remember this moment." The tribunal would decide their fate soon enough, but Carter already knew the outcome. The weight of history would not be gentle with those who had built their empire on the suffering of others. Outside, the city smoldered, but it was no longer the inferno of war, only the dying embers of a civilization that had believed itself untouchable. Civilians had begun to emerge from hiding, stepping cautiously into streets once dominated by Imperial soldiers. Some of them watched the Terran forces with fear, others with something more complicated. There had been no mass executions, no indiscriminate slaughter. Humanity had not come as conquerors. They had come as something far more terrifying, the reckoning. In the command center aboard the U.T.F. Retribution, President Helena Vasquez stood before the galaxy itself, her face projected across every remaining Imperial world. "The war is over," she announced, her voice steady, unwavering. "The empire that once ruled you is no more. Those who led it, who enslaved and slaughtered, will answer for their crimes." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "You have a choice. You can cling to the ruins of a dead empire, or you can stand with us and build something better. But know this, never again will humanity suffer in silence. Never again will we tolerate cruelty disguised as order. If you stand against us, you will meet the same fate as your rulers." The broadcast ended, but its impact would linger far longer. Across the fallen empire, those who had once been subjects, subjugated and silenced, now found themselves in a galaxy without their former masters. Some rejoiced, others feared the unknown, but none could deny the truth. Humanity had changed the course of history in ways that could never be undone. In the war-torn streets of Eshran Prime, Carter watched as the Imperial banners were torn down, replaced not with the flags of Earth, but with something new, a symbol of unity, of order, not through oppression, but through consequence. As he turned away, one of his officers approached. "Orders, sir." Carter took one last look at the ruined city, the remnants of an empire crumbling into dust. Then he exhaled, the weight of it all settling on his shoulders. "We leave them to their own fate," he said. "Our message has been sent." The fleet would depart soon, leaving behind only the truth carved into history. The galaxy would rebuild, but it would do so knowing that humanity was no longer just another voice among the stars. They had spoken, and the universe had no choice but to listen.